Hello, this is Elvi from Comic Book Bin, filling you in since 2002. So, in the last episode, the first part of how to army build your G.I. Joe classified collection, we looked at Cobra mostly and a few pointers about budget, scope of a collection, space, and so on. So, I promised that I would be handling the G.I. Joe side with this episode, and that's what I'm going to be doing. I mentioned that I dip in Action Force and some Marvel Legend. Other collectors will even use Monster Force. I don't have any Monster Force for now, but they are very suitable for a G.I. Joe Army Build collection. Now, the issue with the G.I. Joe Force, as I mentioned in the last episode, is that most of the characters are named characters. So they are not army builders, even though we know in the G.I. Joe lore that there are a lot of army builders. There are a lot of common generic characters that have no real name. The secret to this is to finding those guys and integrating them in your storylines. Now, on the G.I. Joe side, Hasbro released in 2024 the Perfect Army Builder. That would be the 16th anniversary infantry troopers. I've got 6 of them, and that's the core of my army building of G.I. Joe classified on the Joe side. They're perfect for that. I've also got some Navy SEAL divers, but only 2 of them. They're a specialized force. There shouldn't be as many as the regular ones. But before I go into all those details, let's backtrack a bit on a general setup of an army building collection. Besides collecting several of the same character, you need to be able to show them in action because there's so many of them. Most of us, we tend to just put them in rank. So we have legions showing up, fighting queues, and so on. Now, those look good and are perfect to be stored on a shelf, but the diorama aspect is also important. So having something else where they can all look it out, fight their opposing Cobra numbers. For example, the new Cobra bunker that's coming up is perfect for an army build collection where you can display several Joes, several Cobras fighting it out against one another. Also with the vehicles that we have, for example, if you have your Cobra Techno Vipers manning some of those cannons, some of those tanks, some of those Jeeps, well, Cobra Stingers, they're called. That's perfect for that. You need ground crews manning that equipment, and that's where those specialized crews can come in and add to your displays. For example, we've got Spider Wolf. Well, I bought a second Spider Wolf, and that second Spider Wolf, I just called him Mustard. The head I use on him was the extra head from Kamakura, which is the exact same head, but the skin tone is different, which means when you put the 2 of them side by side, you've got one Wolf Spider, and you have another character that looks exactly like him, but with a lighter skin tone, using Kamakura's head. So I've got Mustard. Why is he called Mustard? Ketchup and Mustard from the Sky Striker team that we never got. Well, he's wearing yellow, so I called him Mustard. So with those 2, I've got kind of a fighting crew that can work around my Dragonfly. So I've got my Dragonfly crew. They're generic. They have specialized name, Wolf Spider, Mustard. I could even call him Ketchup and Mustard, I guess, but I've got 2 of them. That's an army build. I only have 2 Navy SEAL divers, and I don't need any more than that. Those 2 guys can accompany Torpedo on that raft of theirs, which I showed in another video. That raft is perfect. It's an OG Joe 1/6 raft that actually floats and has a motor in, but the raft itself is a perfect size for a 112 action figure. So when I've got Torpedo going on a mission, he's got 2 specialized crews. They're specialized G.I. Joe Navy SEALs. They're not named characters, and they both go out on missions with him. That's perfect. That's how you army build your collection. So you've got generic characters that support the principal character, in this case Torpedo, on a beautiful raft. How can you get better than that? And with that raft, I've put another Joe that we don't get to see often, which is Topside. Now, my Topside is made from a Shipwreck action figure. You'll notice that Shipwreck and Topside, as well as my version of Cutter, look exactly the same. They have the same uniform. They're army builders in a sense. Topside was a named character in the old Joe line, and now he's become a little bit of a generic trooper, along with Shipwreck and Cutter. This is the same thing people have been doing with Grunt. We're using Grunt's body for Zap, like I've done here, but you can also use Grunt's body for Short Fuse. Also, in my case, I've used my second Grunt for General Joe Colton. I used the older Falcon head with Grunt's body, and that gave me Joe Colton as an older, more senior and tenured Joe that can go on the field with my infantry, but also other characters. In the case of the Joes, well, Hasbro gave us the infantry troopers. They're perfect for that, but there are other Joes like Shipwreck, Grunt, and even Stalker that you can reuse, customize into making other generic Joes if you want. Another collection that I've been using to create more Joes are the Valaverse Delta troopers. I've got about 6 of them. One of them is broken, mission, but I'm using my Delta Troopers not as soldiers or infantry in the field. I use them more for defensive purposes and at the G.I. Joe base. So they're manning operation at the G.I. Joe base, the pit. And to make them different, each of them, I got heads from Power Rangers, which fit perfectly with the Valaverse neck peg. And I'm using this to create a larger army of no-name characters that are in the background, but that support the Joe operation at the pit. In order to make them more military-like, I used the harnesses from the Foosh Ninjas. The Foosh Ninjas came with two harnesses, a classic one and a modern one. So I left them with the classic harness and I use the extra modern harness and I put them on the Valaverse figures who have now become my support crew at the pit. They can wear helmets or not, but they support my Joes. And in a sense, the rest of my Action Force troops, individualized characters, serve as the defensive team at the pit. They're not formal Joes per se. I guess you could call them Action Force. They're the support crew that support the Joes who go on special missions. So they stay at the base most of the time. And when Cobra attacks, they're the guys who are supposed to protect the base while the Joes do go out on missions. So for me, the Action Force crews that I've got here, they don't go on missions. They stay put. And that's the way I like it. Those are the same crews that will support and man the Vamp along with Clutch. So already we've got a storyline going on and we have those characters playing a role in the background. Now I do know that some of you guys prefer to use Action Force as Valaverse intended, especially with their comics and that specific lore. I don't have that kind of attachment, but the figures are of a very good quality and we all know that they're fully compatible with G.I. Joe Classified. They're about the same scale. You can even exchange the equipment that they use with one another and they've got the same idea, even though the design aesthetics are not exactly the same. They're still compatible with one another. And that's why using my Action Force, I don't have many of them, but using the few that I've got in my collection as support staff for the Joes, for the name Joes, is a winning strategy for me. You could argue that Action Force, more than G.I. Joe Classified, has provided a lot more of those army builders, various army builders that you can use in different terrains. You even have the polar Arctic ones, you've got blue ones, you've got green ones, you've got desert ones. We don't have that for the Joes. They also are cheaper, so you can use any kind of gear with them. But if you're like me, you're going to be using them as support crews for your G.I. Joe team. So they have a defensive function. And someone like Condor is kind of a Joe, but he's not really a Joe. He's really like the logistics and the operation commander of the pit. And he directs the other Action Force characters to protect the pit and man the equipment of the Joes. It makes a lot of sense that your expeditionary force is not exactly in control of the base where they sit at. So Condor is a captain, could be a major. He's the commander of the base, of the pit itself. He still has to answer to someone like Hawk, but the crew that he mans does not go outside and fight the Cobras unless the Cobras attack the base itself. And that makes perfect sense. It's a bit like saying that the military police is not part of the Joe team, even though they are on the same base as the Joe team. They're a different force. It also helps my Joe stay undercover, as for the public, this is just another military base with something that looks like Action Force as opposed to a G.I. Joe headquarters called the Pit. Now, my 60th anniversary Joes, as you know, all came with extra heads, mask heads, Caucasian, African American, and I try not to use any of them. By now, I've got a lot of duplicate and extra Joe heads whose peg fit those guys. If you recall, the G.I. Joe neck pegs are not the same standard size as Valaverse or Marvel Legends. The peg is much smaller, so not every action figure will fit them perfectly. But most Joes have the same size. Well, the male figures have the same neck peg size, and that will fit. I've got extras of many characters that I find very useful right now. Because I bought 2 extra shipwrecks, I've got a total of 3 of them in all. I've got an extra 2 heads for shipwreck that I can use. Chuckles came with a second head, a beat up head, and a regular head. I think that the beat up head looks better for the character, so I'm using the regular generic head as another head. Snow Job came with 2 heads also. I'm using the second head here. Quick Kick came with an extra head also, But in this case, because of the armband and the haircut, it doesn't fit as well. But if I ever have 7 infantry trooper, I can use quick kick as the 7th head. I bought an extra stalker, so I can reuse this head here on one of the infantry soldiers to make another African American soldiers. I've got 3 grunts in all, so I'm reusing the grunt's head also with those extra guys. Now, those no-name infantry soldiers are Joes, and they go out and battle along with the Joes. They're generic guys. With the hood on their head, I can mask most of their faces, and they don't have to be the regular Joes that we know. So I'm using those extra heads, masking most of them, putting them in the field. So instead of having just a mask version of the Joes, I've got green shirts that go into battle with my regular Joes, but they have real faces. You don't get to see all of them. This is how you reuse those extra parts that Hasbro puts with all those figures. Obviously, I'm stuck with a bunch of masked heads, but I'll find something to do with them eventually. So even though there are less Joes to create an army build, you can still army build the Joe side if you use a little bit of strategy. It's not exactly like building a Cobra army, but you have opportunities to create support crews and a defensive force using Valaverse Action Force action figures that round up the numbers around your Joes. And I like that. At the same time, you can reuse as much as you want from the extra heads that you've got when you kit bash other figures such as Grunt and Stalker or even Shipwreck, and we use all of that as fodder for your infantry troopers. Like I mentioned, I use Marvel Legend extra heads and Power Rangers unmasked heads with my Valaverse. I've also mentioned that I use harnesses from Foosh Ninjas, the modern harnesses, and I put them on my Valaverse Action Force. They come with different weapons, but it doesn't matter. They're support crews, and their uniform, they offer defensive and support operations for the Joes. So the Joes are your expeditionary force. They're not the defensive force at the pit. That's the way I like it. I mentioned that I use Marvel Legends. We haven't seen many of them here, but I'll give a little bit of a hint of that in a third episode. I will also be looking at the Iron Grenadier. Now, the Iron Grenadiers are only starting right now, so it's a small force for me, but I still have a strategy to army build them. Not to the same extent as Cobra or even G.I. Joe, because there are less of them, but you can still army build them, and I'll be sharing in a future episode what you can do with those guys if you want to army build them also. This is LV from Comic Book Bin, filling you in since 2002. Like and subscribe.